Welcome to Faithful, the podcast where we explore the intersection of leadership, faith, and impact. I'm your host, Christopher Swing, President and CEO of Vantage Surgical Solutions. Through thoughtful conversations with business leaders, missionaries, and changemakers, we uncover the principles that guide their work and connect them to timeless wisdom. In Season 1, we're diving into the foundational organizations and experiences that shape my own leadership journey. Whether you're a leader in business, faith, or your community, this conversation is packed with inspiration and practical wisdom. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovering how faith and leadership intersect in meaningful ways. Let's dive into the episode. So welcome back to Faithful, and today I have with me Dawn Johnson. And Dawn is my attorney for Vantage and a good friend. We got connected because of receiving a Distinguished Alum Award at Eastern. And I got to introduce her to the dinner, which was always exciting. And I just really enjoy that part of the experience with distinguished alums. I got to listen to her story, and my hope is that she can share a little bit of that with you, and it will be motivating. So welcome, Dawn.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon with you and your audience.
Yeah. So let's start at EIU, since that's kind of where we're connected at. Part of my conversation with Jay, which just published and you haven't had a chance to listen to yet, is how the student experience has changed, dramatically over the years. And further than that, I explained to him, that maybe it doesn't really matter because the affinity is really, what's important. And so maybe they're getting exactly what they want. But I go back to my time, and I know that my experience on campus was a lot different than what the students, especially through COVID, had. What was your experience at EIU?
Well, I'm not sure how much it's changed over time. And since I'm re-engaged with campus now and get to talk to the president, Jay, and others through my board service, I think the things that made Eastern stand out are still true. And that's what I remember from my days at Eastern are the relationships that I had at Eastern and continue to this day. The folks that I hung around with and my professors and my advisors in the journalism department there are still my friends today. And I think that's what really sticks out in my mind about my days at Eastern. I would say I didn't live through COVID during my undergrad, but I think the relationships, that was one of the unique things I liked about Eastern Illinois and going there. The people that were important during my days at Eastern are important in my life today. I'm still good friends with them. We have our own private Facebook group. We see each other. We have reunions at Eastern, and I just really have great memories of being at Eastern, the small class size. And of course, that was the launching of my first career.
So let's talk about that. So you started out as a journalism major at Eastern Illinois University, and you are a partner at UB Greensfelder in St. Louis here. So obviously there was some meandering along the way to get you to there. Can you tell us the story about that?
It wasn't really meandering. I'll correct you on that, but I do want to point out that I had this really great experience at Eastern. I had the opportunity to work on what was then a daily print newspaper, which was really just an unbelievable experience and prepared me to be a real journalist. I mean, we felt like we were journalists because we were putting out a daily newspaper every day. It was published on site. And that's really where I had for my first taste of leadership. Was I started out as a reporter, and then I became an editor. And so I had reporters working under me who reported to me. But I was part of a bigger team, and that was really the entire newspaper staff, is also the team of editors who met every day to talk about what the paper the next day was going to look like. And we were very well read. I had a lot of interesting experiences as a reporter. I learned a lot through my work on the newspaper there. And that really did launch me. I got my degree in journalism. Both my newspaper advisor, Dave Reed, and one of my all-time favorite professors, Dan Thorberg, who is now deceased, wrote recommendations for me. I got an internship at a newspaper in Central Illinois, the Decatur Herald and Review. I served an internship there. They liked me so much. They hired me to be a stringer during my last semester at Eastern. So I got to cover city council news and that sort of thing. And actually see my name published in what I, again, call a real newspaper. And then they hired me based on recommendations in my work over the summer. They hired me as a full-time newspaper reporter. And I did that for 7 years. So as life does, things happen in people's lives. And my brother was killed, unfortunately, in a car accident at the age of 21. We're only 15 months apart, so we're very, very close. And, Jerry got to see me become a reporter and was able to enjoy some of my success. But as things happen, I loved my job as a reporter. I really liked what I was doing. I got exposed to all kinds of different areas. I covered the police department. I covered the courts. I covered city government, state government, the schools, pretty much every beat, as we called them. I got to cover for the newspaper. So I got a broad range of experience doing those sorts of things. As time went on, I think when you have a tragic death like that, by the way, Jerry was my only sibling. I have no other siblings. So, I was trying to help my mom and dad through this horrendous thing that had happened. No parent should ever have to bury a child. But I was trying to help them through that, recognized I had my own problems with grief and was trying to help them, not focusing on myself. And we got involved in an organization that I read about in the Herald Review called the Compassionate Friends, which is an organization for bereaved parents and siblings, got them involved with that, actually became a leader in that organization, got on the national board. But as time went on, I started re-examining my life and what I wanted to do with my life. And there was an important event that actually happened with my brother's death that he was in a vehicle with two other friends, and the driver was intoxicated. And so he was being prosecuted for reckless homicide. And there were what actually happened was we didn't find out until literally the courthouse steps that the local state's attorney was negotiating a plea agreement with the driver that he would get off basically the equivalent of a traffic ticket is kind of what I would say. That really stopped me in my tracks. I thought, things have to be different. They have to be better than that. Victims have to have some say in what happens when these horrific things happen in their lives. And we just, we weren't consulted. We were literally told at the last minute. I think my mother actually was like going up the stairs at the courthouse when the state's attorney was walking down from the courtroom. And that's really what sticks in my mind about this terrible experience. And so I thought, I can do better than that. And that really was one of the important factors in why I decided to go to law school. As I mentioned, I had also been covering the courts and the police and was, really enjoyed those things that I was reporting on and the opportunity to do that. And so I thought, I'm going to go to law school. And it was a huge decision, obviously, for me. I'd been working for 7 years at a job I really loved. And I thought, gosh, now I got to go from having a paying job. I was still paying my student loans back for Eastern, and I'm now going to go into debt again. On top of my coupons that I pay every month for my loan at Eastern. So quitting my job and having no income was a little scary, but I have fabulous parents who helped me and always supported every decision I made and were 100% supportive in that. And so I enrolled and got into Washington University School of Law here in St. Louis and moved down to St. Louis and this is where I've been ever since. And so that was sort of the impetus for me going to law school. It really was a life-changing event that caused that. And I've really never looked back. I guess the bottom line is I never grew up thinking I'm going to be a lawyer. In fact, when I went to Eastern, I thought I was going to be a social worker. And then I pivoted and said, no, I'm going to be a journalist. I'd always had an interest in writing. I wrote for the newspaper in my junior high school in Decatur, Illinois. I was the editor-in-chief of my paper in high school. And so I had this writing background. My mom actually, when I was getting the Distinguished Alumni Award at Eastern, found a picture of me when I was 2 years old sitting on the couch with a newspaper around me. So I guess I knew from age 2 that I was going to be a journalist. But the funny thing is that I did not abandon my journalism background when I became a lawyer, because people always ask me, how did you do the transition? I said, it really wasn't that difficult. Once you get past the 3 years of law school and all the reading that you have to do, everything I learned at Eastern and as a journalist applies exactly to what I do today. I mean, I interview witnesses, I investigate facts, allegations that the other side makes. In my cases, I'm a litigator. I search for the truth. I did that as a journalist. It's a little bit different because as a journalist, you have to be objective and present both sides. As a lawyer, I advocate for my client, obviously, but it's very important for me to still find out the facts, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I say, for my client. Because as a lawyer, we have ethical obligations to present the truth, no matter what it is, whether it's in favor of my client or not. Those are the facts that need to be put forth before the court so that the judge can or the jury can make the correct decision. And that's what, I believe in. And I'm sometimes a little direct with my clients, but I'm like, I need to know the bad stuff, guys, or girls, as the case may be. I'd rather learn about the bad facts. Every case has a bad fact. I'd rather learn about it now so that I can deal with it. I don't want to hear about it at your deposition or at trial. And so the two careers have really meshed well together. And I always go back to my foundation at Eastern as really how important that was to what I do today.
So, I mean, I think one of the things that I recognize that's different in a lot of successful people, and I think you just heard it, is you recognize an injustice and you could have complained about it and you could have been upset about it, but instead you said, no, I'm going to do something about it.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that I see in a lot of my successful friends is that the difference between the person who steps in the background and drops a note on Facebook that makes everybody really excited and the person who makes a difference. And it's really about action because, there's rarely a positive outcome that comes from inaction. And so, wow, that was kind of a crazy story. And I've heard it before, but it's still bone chilling. So it also sounded to me like you felt like you were extremely well prepared at Eastern for both kind of adventures, right? Like you felt like the preparation for the journalism side was good. It sounds like you had great success there before you were challenged to do something different. And then having that base of knowledge and experience when you went to law school, it doesn't seem like that hurt you either.
That's right. And, I felt like I had a very good base at Eastern. Looking back now, as I guess some people will call me a business lawyer. I represent a lot of businesses. I didn't kind of go off on the tangent of why I didn't become a prosecutor because I did look into that because I really thought that was my calling. But I ended up here at my firm, Greensfelder, as it was called. And this is where I've been for the past 28 years. I did work for a federal judge for 4 years out of law school. But when I look back, I tell people now if they're considering, going into law at some point that I wish I would have taken more business classes, for example. I took a few at Eastern, but not a lot. But the great thing about journalism is it really does prepare you, I think, for anything that you want to do in life because you learn how to ask tough questions. And I think that's been an important part of my role as a leader in the various organizations I've been involved with is being able to ask people tough questions. And I learned that at Eastern. And then, of course, as a lawyer, I have to ask a lot of tough questions of my own clients and then of, the opposing party. And being able to do that and not be afraid to ask the tough questions or to take the tough position, things that I learned at Eastern.
I want to kind of transition into your leadership in the law firm here. And, first of all, maybe before we get into that, like, obviously you became a lawyer. You were obviously very good at what you did. Faithful is proudly sponsored by Vantage Surgical Solutions, where excellence meets innovation in advanced healthcare solutions. With a foundation built on integrity, creativity, and commitment, Vantage empowers leaders to shape the future, just as we explore leadership through faith on the podcast. Vantage Surgical Solutions, standing for excellence, leading advanced healthcare solutions. How do you make it to the leadership committee? Like, what does that process look like? Did you just win a couple of really big cases? How do you transcend the masses, right?
Looking back now, this is my 28th year. I was 27 years at Greensfelder. This will be actually February 1 is the 1-year anniversary of our merger, but I still look at it all as 28 years at Greensfelder. it was a goal that I had set for myself some time ago, that I wanted to be on the board of directors for the law firm. And it seemed like maybe an impossible feat to me at some point, because, there are only a few people that are on the board, and they, those are, you just think, well, those are the leaders of the firm, and I'm not one of them. And how am I going to achieve that? And I did set that as my goal. And quite frankly, I tried a couple of times and didn't make it. I was interviewed by the nominating committee, and others were chosen, but I kept trying, and I, again, made it my goal. And I think one of the things that I tried to set myself apart from when I was seeking to get on the board of directors was I view myself as the spokesperson for the minority. And there are a lot of people in whatever organization you're in, the law firm or other nonprofits that I've been involved with over the years, who have strong opinions about things, but they're not willing to step up and speak about them. And so people would come to me and complain about different things. I often felt like that was my role, was to be the person who would speak up for those who were not willing to speak up for themselves. And sometimes that is the minority, or they feel like their opinions don't count. And so I wanted to make sure that those opinions were at least made known to the board leadership. I saw that as my role. And I also saw my role as somebody who would push back and ask the tough questions. And again, that traces right back to Eastern, right? And my skills as a reporter, asking tough questions and not just rubber stamping decisions that may seem like the popular choice. And I think you have to have those kinds of people on whatever organization or that you're involved with, because that's how you really, I think, make decisions and make the right decisions.
So, we're in the UB Greensfelder office in downtown St. Louis on the 20th floor, looking out over the beautiful city of St. Louis with a little bit of snow on the ground. And, you've been part of a very successful firm here. You were part of the board at the time in which that decision was made. Give us a little bit of insight, and obviously what you can tell us, or what that decision process is like when you're in a successful firm. Like, this wasn't a pressure situation. It was more of a transcending who you are kind of thing, from my understanding. And so, what are the processes that you go through in trying to date to find that ideal firm to really partner up with? And what was that process like? And then kind of, you mentioned it, there's an emotional attachment, right, in our careers to the organizations in which we work with. And so, how do you adapt to a new organization that's much bigger and broader and robust?
Okay, so that's a lot. And so I'm probably going to speak for a few minutes on that. As I said, I've been at Greensfelder / UB Greensfelder for 28 years, and so I believe when we voted on this that I was the person on the board with the longest tenure at Greensfelder. And during that time span that I've been at the firm, I remember there have been two significant events. The first one was in 2019 when our CEO and president, Tim Thornton, was killed in a bicycle accident. It was tragic. We had never faced anything like that ever before, to suddenly have your leader, who was respected, well-liked. I mean, just, I can't say enough good things about Tim, to be killed. And then and having to deal with the aftermath of that, and then choosing a new leader for the firm. And it was very difficult. The second event, which was transformative, was the decision to merge with Ulmer Burn. And we had, over the previous years, when Tim was alive, our previous CEO, explored several options for mergers. And this has sort of always been in the back of our mind. And then it was put on hold. Obviously, when Tim died, that was not important at that time. Then, of course, we had COVID. And so there were a lot of moving parts. The legal industry is it's changing, and you see these mega mergers, and you see bigger and bigger and bigger firms. And so in order to thrive and survive, law firms, they have to grow, and or you die, right? Now, since I've been at Greensfelder, when I joined here in 1997, I think it was, we had 65 attorneys, and then pre-merger, I think we were somewhere between 150 to 165, if depending on what time period it was. So we had grown quite a bit, but just looking at the legal landscape, I mean, clients are, demanding more from their law firms. They want more bench strength. They, want more specialties. They, all the things that your clients are looking for. And so we wanted to grow, and we had been doing some growing by, bringing in small practice groups from other firms, but not a transformative one like we did last year. And so we have been looking at various partners, and there's that whole, so it's a really challenging process trying to find the right partner. So what we did hire a consulting firm, and that specializes in law firm mergers. And I think that was extremely helpful, because trying to navigate the whole process, the consultant we were working with, she identified a number of different firms and people that they were working with. So it was nice to have, we would get spreadsheets with different law firm possibilities and stats to the extent that they could reveal the information to us. And we would examine those. And we met with a number of different firms. And I remember going to some of these firms, and they looked like they were great partners. But one of the things that I think I learned from this whole process was really the importance of talking to your partners, and what do they want. As I mentioned, I've been here for 28 years. We have a number of partners who are long-term employees here and attorneys, and we have a culture that is very important. And no one wanted to lose that culture. That was the number one thing that we kept hearing. And so some of the people we were talking to, we were, for lack of a better phrase, going to be swallowed up. And we were not going to have equal seats on the board of directors, for example, the firm governance, those sorts of things. And they just weren't, well, first of all, they weren't acceptable to the board, and we knew they weren't going to be acceptable to our fellow partners. And so even though they looked like they would be great, they had offices in places where our clients, we do have a national practice where a lot of our clients were, a lot of our practices are focused. When you took the step back and we looked at how things were going to shake out, it just wasn't going to be acceptable to our partners. And number one at the top of the list was the culture. And so, we had talked to Omer before. And so we went back to them, and, the timing was right. And what I really liked about what the board did pre-merger was, when we identified Omer and we thought this is a good fit for us, we arranged a lot of pre-merger meetings before the vote was ever taken by each firm. We had meetings in our offices. We had meetings in their offices in Ohio and elsewhere. And we would go to their offices. They would come here, and people would get to meet each other. And I kind of liken it to when you meet somebody, like when I first met you, Chris, like you just know when you click with somebody, you kind of get that feeling, right? I think we all know what that's like. And that's kind of what it felt like with Omer. Their culture is really aligned with ours, and it's important to them. When you go to their offices, you just get that feeling that I can work with these people. And that was really important to us. Number one, the culture, and keeping the Greensfelder culture that was so important to people, and to me, quite frankly, and the board. Really, when you are entering into something like this, you really have to not only do your due diligence with the finances and all the other policies and procedures and everything to see how that's all going to work out, but you have to think about, I think the people has to be number one. because you've got to recognize whatever kind of organization you have, how are you going to mesh with these people? And we really felt like we found a partner who is equal to us. And I think that's why it's been successful. Now we're just 1 year into it, but certainly the partnerships that we've had already, it's been challenging, but also exciting. And it's re-energized some of our partners because they have new opportunities for work. And we have depth in some practices that we didn't have before, really on both sides of the table. And so I think, so we went and actually had individual meetings with partners ourselves. I would go talk to people that I've known for years. What are your concerns about this? Everybody has concerns when you're going to merge with another law firm, when you've been, we've been this way for actually our firm was celebrated its 125th anniversary during COVID. So we've been around for a long time and we've been successful, and our culture is what it is, right? And so people were really anxious about that. How is the culture going to change? Number one. And then of course, another question people have is, well, is my job safe? Are my benefits going to change? Is my pay going to change? All those other questions that people have. And I think part of the leadership, an important part of leadership is being transparent with what we know. This is how they operate. This is how we operate. We think we're going to be able to get best practices from both of those and merge those, but also being able to admit that we don't have all the answers, because we sure didn't. And I also learned when I was going through this process is to trust my partners. And I'm not an M&A lawyer, for example. We've got some M&A lawyers on the board that we trust them. They know what they're doing, and they can advise us on how this is all going to work and what are the new membership agreement, partnership agreement. And the other thing, we were going from being a professional corporation to a partnership. And so we went from being W-2 employees to now having to do K-1s, all these things that make people very anxious, changing our health insurance, changing our 401k, all of these things that you have to work through to merge law firms. It's a lot. And those things are ongoing. As we are speaking today, all those policies needed to be updated and changed and are still in the process of it. So it's not a quick process by any means. But the good news was that being open, talking, being transparent with our partners, the board providing all the information it had that it could share, and led us to have a unanimous vote in favor of the merger at both firms. I mean, it was, and that was such a wonderful day. It was, February 1st of 2024, and being able to achieve that was, I think, an accomplishment that I'm quite proud of as being a member of the board of directors at the time.
So with M&A, that's a very interesting business. The best advice I can give to anybody that's trying to do an M&A transaction is to expect the unexpected, because there will be plenty of them. And I think your point was dead on. You do all this due diligence, right? And everybody kind of has a vision of as far as like, what does this look like after? But rarely does it go exactly as planned. So give us, if you can share, what some of the biggest challenges that you guys maybe faced that you weren't expecting. Obviously, for anyone who's gone from a W-2 to a K-1, they know exactly what she was just talking about, because that causes a lot of heartburn. And I'm sure it did for you, even you personally, right? I mean, that's a big transition. For those of you who don't know, a lot of times, it could be March and April and you still aren't sure what you made last year per your K-1, which is way different than, hey, I deposited X number of dollars and that's what my W-2 is going to show, plus, some insurance and stuff. But so give us some insight, like what were some of the challenges that maybe popped up or that you guys had to overcome in the process?
I think I've mentioned some of those already. The biggest for the partners, I think, is that one. It's just a completely different way of doing things. And even if you have clients and you deal with this in your own practice law, it's still, when you have to do it yourself, is quite a change. But merging computer systems and document management processes, email, accounting systems, literally every system that you have that you run a business with, you have to decide how are you going to make these things into one, right? And thankfully, we have a lot of very smart people who can figure all that out. And I'm not going to sit here and say it was smooth. And we're still working through some of this stuff. And, there's some bumps along the way, and you try to make sure that it's not impacting your clients to the best of your abilities. So those sorts of challenges are very real, and I don't know how you get around them. You don't. You just have to work through them and trust that you have the people on board, or you bring people in that can help you to do that. And we went from a completely different computer system where, we had our desktops, and now we have a little laptop we carry home every night. And actually I love it. I can sit on my couch and work, or on an airplane or whatever. But things, with the docking system, and everything had to be examined, and is still being examined. As I mentioned, some of the policies and procedures are still changing. And the thing is, being flexible is important, because you may start doing it this way and say, this isn't really working, so we are going to change. And of course, people don't like change. And we just went through this huge change, merging with another firm. And so when you're faced with additional change, when you thought, okay, things are starting to get a little smooth here, and then you get another email that we have to deal with a particular problem. But I would say overall, speaking now a year out, that I think things are good, and they're working smoothly. I haven't seen my practice impact. People are like, well, how's it impacting your practice? I'm like, I come into work every day. I don't feel any different. I just have more colleagues. And I have new and updated systems to use. We have a combined IT firm that is phenomenal. So, those sorts of things you just have to work through.
Yeah, I just remember you being either at a meeting or at my house. I can't remember which. And you're like, yeah, I got to take my laptop back because they're programming it and they want it this weekend. And so there's definitely some inconveniences that come along with going through a process like that. So, kind of transitioning a little bit into, I know you have a faith background. How does that affect kind of your leadership, whether that be, inside of your practice or inside the organization? How does that play into your leadership, and how has that helped to maybe mold your leadership style as something that's important to you?
Well, I try to do what's right. I don't know, this sounds kind of oversimplified maybe, but in trying to be compassionate and have empathy for people, understand where they're coming from. And, I think just really listening to my heart when I'm trying to make decisions. And sometimes when I make my points at meetings or whatever, it's like I said, it's not always the most popular position to take, but just knowing that I think I'm doing the right thing by speaking for people who wouldn't be speaking otherwise. And, we went to church. We are Baptists, and going to church was very important to us. And my parents always taught me the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. And they also taught me, to have compassion for other people who are not as fortunate as you, and that is how I think it has impacted my leadership, and how when I have identified problems, I try to do something about it, or at least bring it to somebody's attention to see how things can be improved. Sometimes I think, as a lawyer, it can be somewhat difficult because, we are dealing with human beings as clients, right? And and we also have our ethical duties as lawyers, but that I think is separate and apart from just my own belief system and my own values. dealing with lawyers sometimes on the other side can be very difficult. And sometimes I don't like the way I'm treated and want to lash out. And I just have to take a step back and try not to do that because that's not in my client's best interest. But, having been raised by parents that really were role models to me as far as how to treat people and how to help other people. Those things are ingrained in me and will be for the rest of my life. And that's what I've tried to do, not only through service at my law firm, but through service on, community nonprofits and other organizations that I've been involved with over the years.
How has your leadership style changed over time? And right, wrong, or indifferent, Faithful is brought to you by Vantage Surgical Solutions, where we believe in progress through passion. If you're inspired by innovation and excellence in healthcare, we invite you to join our team. At Vantage, we're not just shaping the future of healthcare, we're empowering individuals to make a difference. Visit our careers page to explore opportunities and see if your journey aligns with ours. Vantage Surgical Solutions, where passion meets purpose. I don't know what your perspective is, but I suddenly, once I became kind of successful, and I use that term very lightly, but like once my own psyche started to recognize my success, I started to care a whole lot more about other people. What was that like in your life, and how have you evolved, from that hungry young lady that's going to get, that writes the absolute best stories through, going to law school and then into a law firm where you eventually become a leader of the law firm and leading them into even a major change of like merging with another organization? How has your style evolved?
Well, when I started here at the law firm, I had a mentor who really got me started in in my interest in franchise law, which is the area of law that I focus on. And he was very good at assembling teams and recognizing the people on the team for what they did good. And he was very generous. If he had extra tickets to something, he would give them to me so that my husband and I could go to an event or something that I, as a young associate, would not have otherwise been able to go to. And so I really feel fortunate that I had that experience because I saw how he assembled teams, and that was a very successful way to run, really complex cases, and everybody sort of had their role, and it really worked well. I think as I kind of moved on and then became a partner, is that I still do this a little bit, maybe a lot of it, but let's say less so. I still try to do everything myself. And I recognize in myself that I need to do a better job of delegating. So I think I have been doing it better and have been working on delegating more to use my team members. But I still like working with teams, and I like to recognize the work that my team does for me. And I like to get their opinions. It's not all about me. And I worked for a federal judge here in St. Louis, Judge Nose, who once told me that he wants to surround himself by people who are smarter than he is. And I like that. And I agree with that. I don't feel like this is all about me. I am maybe the partner in charge of a particular case, but I want to surround myself by people who are really smarter than me. And I ask them for their opinion. Younger associates, I want to know what you think about this case. How should we handle this? What is the strategy that we should be considering here? Should we be considering this or that? And I value their opinions, and oftentimes say, you know what, that's a great idea. Or, well, I like that part of the idea, but let's use part of that, but let's think about this. And so I really do think it's important to seek opinions from your team members and actually use those, or try to find a way to incorporate what they what they are offering. So it's that collaboration with your team. And I think that's sort of how I've evolved over time. Instead of like just sitting and trying to figure it out on my own, do it myself and me figure this out. Is like, if you have a team of people, then I think more ideas are better than just what I may think is the way to handle a particular matter. So, in helping people identify their strengths and what they can bring to the table. And I like the fact that if you are working with a team, it's kind of like what happened with the merger, right? On the board, we have people who have M&A expertise. We have, people who have an HR, they're in our labor and employment practice. And so drawing on people's strengths that way to get the best result for your client. And so I think that's how my leadership has evolved over time. I think I've always sought out people's opinions, but I've done it more in a more deliberate way through delegating more work, and giving the people who work for me opportunities to come up with strategy and help me work through whatever the legal issue is, and also just letting them have interaction with the client, and so that they feel like they're part of the team.
So what kind of advice would you give to a young and up and comer, basically, maybe not necessarily with the journalist background, but in law, that, has a similar desire to be effective, maybe be part of the leadership eventually of the firm? Like, what advice would you give to them?
Well, this is what I always tried to do. You have to make yourself indispensable to your supervisor. And I think that ultimately translates to the service that you provide to your client or customer. Make yourself indispensable. And, that means working hard, doing the best you can, producing the best work product that you can, and delivering it on a timely basis. Those are important factors to me. I often called a hard grader, as they say, but I'd like to call it attention to detail. And so I expect that of people who work for me. And that's why that's the first piece of advice I would give. The second one is really doesn't have to be in law or it could be in any field. But when I first started as a lawyer, I really just put my head down and I thought, I took other people's advice and just learn to be a good lawyer, because just be a good lawyer first and worry later about trying to get clients. The landscape has changed now. And of course we incorporate, as I call it, business development early on. But I really think that is a misnomer. I think if you find something that you're passionate about, and whether that's like, I found my passion was franchise law, but I'm talking in the broader scheme of life, in the community, for example, find something that you're passionate about. What really like tugs at your heart or gets you like excited, and go volunteer for that organization as a volunteer or on the board of directors. Believe me, there's a lot of organizations that are looking for people who will serve on their boards and actually do something, and then get on the board and actually do something, or on a committee and actually do something. Don't just put it on your resume, right? And the way that happened. So for many years, I look back at my career and I really worked hard, and that was part of, I think, the reason that I was successful. I worked really hard. I had a good mentor. But in the process, I kind of lost myself as far as my passion for helping people. I feel like I was helping my clients, but that whole piece of the community I kind of forgot about, and I really missed that. Our firm sponsors a candidate every year for the leadership program here in St. Louis called Focus St. Louis Leadership. And I was nominated and got accepted to that program about 12 years ago. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. And we were, for those who may not be familiar with Focus St. Louis, and it may be similar to programs in other cities as well, you go through this months-long program where you are exposed to all different areas of the community. It really was regional because it extended over into Southern Illinois for us as well as other counties in the St. Louis region. But education, government, the criminal justice system, business, really all different aspects. And we have a all day Friday and either a half day or a full day on Saturday, 2 days in a row. So you can't be checking your computer working. You have to be immersed in this to actually get the benefit of it. And when they have leaders come in from those various parts of the community to talk to you about whatever the issues are. And it really, I thought as a former journalist, I knew a lot about St. Louis. I knew nothing. And I certainly didn't know about the depth of some of the problems that face the community leaders in all these areas. And that really opened my eyes. And at the end of the program, they asked us to consider, what are you going to do for your community? And so this was a prime opportunity for me to examine what really tugged at my heart. And what tugged at my heart was the superintendent of the St. Louis Public Schools at the time came and spoke to our group. And we also went with a small group to various schools, elementary schools in St. Louis, and I was assigned to one in North St. Louis, and I have to this day, I will never forget that experience because I compared it to my experience in elementary school, and I was sad, let's just say. And I want to get a little emotional when I talk about this because it was another life-changing experience for me. But then, I continue to be bothered by the way property tax system works and, the kids in the inner cities, the condition of their schools compared to those in the outer, wealthier parts of the community. This is not just here, it's everywhere. But I got involved with one of my Focus St. Louis classmates was involved in an organization that at the time was called College Summit. And it was a program that was in place in the public schools in St. Louis, where we went in and helped students. These are not the A students, but the B and maybe some of the C students write their college essays to try to get into college. And we would do a training for a week and then go in for a weekend and help them do that. And that whole experience was life-changing for me. And so that was really something that tugged at my heart. And I got involved with that and then became the president of that organization here. It was a local advisory board. It's now called Peer Forward nationally. But that's my advice to people who, ask me for my advice or that I work with is that, and don't go into that thinking that this is going to help me get clients. It may ultimately, but I have found through my own experience and all the boards that now I have served on since that one is that you may ultimately get clients, but the benefit of, how, the service that you are performing, whether you change one kid's life or one person's life, is far going to exceed anything else that you're going to do in life, at least from my perspective. And, I have, that has expanded my network, no doubt. And then later, connecting people, as we talked about earlier today, connecting people that you meet along the way in these various organizations and your life experiences to each other is, makes you, I think, gives me a good feeling that I've been able to connect two of my friends in different work, may never have met each other, but may benefit from knowing each other in one way or another. So those are some, I think, of the key pieces of advice I give, when I'm talking to people, because the law is very competitive, younger and younger, that people are like, oh, I got to go get clients. And yes, you need to be a good lawyer, but why don't you just, try to live life and expand your reach in the community, and these things will just fall into place.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. If you look back at the just sheer involvement I've had in different boards, I mean, that's what prepared me to be a leader. That's what prepared me to be a good board member, a paid board member. I mean, the skills that you learn, I think of a couple of people off the top of my head, like Mike Metzger and some of the guys that first convinced me to get involved in something that I didn't really want to do necessarily. Like one of the best boards that I've ever been on is a water co-op that I joined in.
Well, so on that point, Chris, I like that point because, as you know, I'm on the Eastern Illinois University Foundation Board of Directors. And I will never forget, I got the call from the CEO asking me if I would be interested in serving on that. The foundation manages the investments for the university, administers scholarships and grants. And I was like, I don't think you have the right person. I don't know anything about finance. He's like, oh, no, you were recommended for this and I think you'd be good. And it was, again, something that I probably wouldn't have thought about on my own. And like your service on that board, it's like, yeah, I don't know if you have the right person here. I think you want an accountant or something like that. And it's been really one of my favorite boards because, like I said, it got me re-engaged with my undergrad university. I get to go back to campus all the time. I met, a lot of great people, including you. And I've learned a lot about finances and investments and things, and it was challenging. And so I think you also have to challenge yourself in some of these endeavors that you take on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that became super obvious to me was that I had a clear vision as to how they were going to solve all of their problems. And then I get into it and I realize how complex all these organizations are and all the competing agendas and all of the intentionality, but the just lack of wherewithal. And I think, you made some good points. The part of the thing that I decided when I got on the Alumni Association board at Eastern was if what I start with and what I finish with is the same, then what a waste of 10 years of life. And so I wasn't going to sit there and just let happen whatever was going to happen. And I'm not saying I definitely was a bull in the china shop early on in that time and probably wasn't the most effective way to get done what I wanted to get done. But over time, you kind of figure out how things work and how you can have impact. And, I've not ever taken away an experience where I was working for a nonprofit and thought, man, I didn't get anything out of that. That's not why I went into it, but I can tell you, like, after the fact, I'm not sure that you shouldn't at least consider going into it for that reason, because I can tell you that every experience, whether I was the president of the chamber in Effingham County, of which I don't live in Effingham County, I just worked there for the last 12 years, 13 years. I was on the Mid-Illinois Big Brothers, Big Sisters Advisory Board for Effingham County. As a matter of fact, I didn't even get a 20 under 40 award in Coles County, but I did in Effingham County. I run an organization there. I guess nobody knows me where I come from. But the Alumni Association board at Eastern. Now I sit on the People's Bank and Trust board of directors. All of these different organizations helped me to be who I am today. And like, you could take out any single piece and there would be something that would come out with it, right? So if you could wind time back and say, okay, well, don't do that. Like, I wouldn't be who I am today, because each one of those different pieces of my experience built me into the holistic leader that I am. So, one of the things that I'm always intrigued about leadership, and I think this is where, Ian kind of tags in with me too, is like, whether it's intentionally like we're faith focused and that causes us to be a leader from that perspective, or I haven't met anyone yet that can turn off their faith and be a leader. And so, I always wonder, like, how do these intersect in different people's lives? And I know that you have a faith background. And so, what is that? How does that affect, your leadership on a day-to-day basis or in general in life, and or maybe even in some of the volunteering aspects that we've talked about?
Well, I think it's your guiding post, right? I mean, you're in your decision making, right? I don't know if it sounds kind of simple, but I mean, I go back to my own upbringing, and I had, role model parents who, and I, part of the way I was raised and taught to do, you try to do what's right. And if you make a mistake, admit it, which I still, to this day, I hear my mom and dad's voice in my head. When I do make mistakes, I tell people I'm sorry, I made a mistake, being able to admit to that. But I think your faith has to be that's your, you know, your, your guide through everything that you do, whether it's work or your marriage or your friendships or service on organizations. I don't know. It's pretty simple.
From an outside perspective, uh, the legal world is kind of viewed with suspicion,
Mm-hmm.
and there are these fair or unfair
Mm-hmm.
caricatures of the legal world, and kind of scummy sorts of attorneys and taking advantage of people. And the legal world is notoriously gray. It's more gray than we want it to be black and white, though we would think of it as black and white. And that's a hard road to walk for someone who does care about black and white. So as a person with a faith background, and you've even mentioned, even separate from that, ethics as an attorney, ethics as a journalist, there's sets of ethics. With those guiding principles, what are the challenges of navigating a very gray, morally ambiguous field? Because that's got to be a regular thing that you come up against.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I often tell people that I ended up in two professions that are, I wouldn't say universally hated, but are disliked. But and it's funny because I never perceived myself as like being when I was a journalist, every day I was like trying to get both sides of the story. If somebody wouldn't pick up my call, so I was like, oh, this is going to be a one-sided story. I was like, it's not going to be objective. That's what you're taught in journalism school. It has to be objective. My thoughts or does not matter. And then you move to the law, and you're right. The law can be interpreted in so many different ways. When we're reading the case law or the regulations or whatever we're dealing with, and you can read it this way, you can read it that way, and you're advocating for your client. But I go back to the fact, and it's why sometimes I tell my clients, you may not like what I'm telling you, but this is the way. This is the way I am seeing this. Now, I can argue, there are ways to take the facts and argue them a certain way, but you have to stay within the boundaries of the truth, right? And it is difficult to navigate, but you have to, right? You have to, because you're ethically bound to do that. But also, I'm bound just for my own moral compass, as you said, right? So and the law is, I think, a really interesting field because of that, because I'm trying to think back through my career, and I don't know if I've ever had what you would call a case that is black and white. There's always some shade of, gray in there, or yeah. And that's also what makes it challenging and fun and all those other things, is because when you get a case to handle for a client, it's like, okay, I'm reading this lawsuit against my client, and this looks terrible. If they did this, but then of course I talk to the client, and there's a whole different side to the story, and it's weaving that story together within the bounds of the law and the truth, to try to get the best outcome for your client. It's not. Yeah, it's a very difficult and challenging, and some days it's exhausting. Sometimes, quite truthfully.
I think it's true in any field, and I can imagine for yours the temptation to cut some corners, the temptation to take advantage of that loophole, and really kind of maneuver behind the scenes in just some deceptive ways. We all know that happens, and again, it happens across the board in every field. But those who have that moral compass, that sense of integrity, it becomes much more challenging, a bit more harder to achieve a level of success, because you can't shortcut things, and someone else who doesn't deserve it can shortcut and get in line in front of you. And that's a really frustrating process to have to process and deal with. But this is what we do.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I have certainly things right now that I would put in that category where I think counsel on the other side is not doing things ethically or misstating things. But you know what? I answer to myself. And so I want to be able to live with myself as far as what I put on a piece of paper. And if I made a mistake, I certainly want to correct that with the court. If I have made a mistake in stating a fact or misstated the law, sometimes lawyers, read the case wrong, or they didn't know it was overturned. And so, I mean, those are what I would call inadvertent mistakes, right? But there are attorneys out there who, as you say, don't operate ethically and are a little what I would call loose with the facts, let's say. And that's troubling. And you can certainly point that out, into the court. And that's where I think your team becomes very important too, sure. Is the feedback with your team and the people that you work with. We have general counsel. I consult with him all the time. I have no problem consulting with him and saying, hey, can I run this situation by you? This issue came up, and, I just don't know how to deal with it. And that having that resource available is very helpful to me, but also the members of your team who are familiar with your case, and you could talk through how you want to make an argument to make sure that, we have an obligation if there, certain law, if there is a case that's directly opposite of what you're arguing here, you have to point it out to the court, and not everybody does that. And of course, there are, as you say, not loopholes, but there are exceptions. And is this really directly opposite to what I'm saying here? There's all kinds of things that come into the analysis of whether something needs to be said this way or that way.
So, you've built an amazing career, run an amazing organization, or helped to run an amazing organization. What do you hope people remember you by, whether that be at Eastern or your nonprofits or even here? Like what do you hope that years from now people remember about you?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is that what I've already mentioned is I try to do what's right. May not always succeed, but I try to do what's right. I'm a compassionate person, and I give, my time and my talent, my money, if needed, to those people who are less fortunate than I am. And I often sit in my office in the evenings. I work late, and my office looks to the west. I have a beautiful view. I have windows on two sides, and I literally, I can show you my phone. I often take a picture of the sunset, and I thank God and I thank my parents for giving me the opportunity to sit in that office and do what I do every day and look at that sunset. I talk to my mom every morning and every evening. My dad is no longer with us, but a lot of times on the way home, I'll say, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to do what I'm doing. And I do thank my parents because they encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to. They just wanted me to be happy, and whatever profession I chose, but they already supported me 100%. And so I feel fortunate to have opportunities that a lot of other people don't get to have. You mentioned this earlier that, not everybody is on a board of directors at a law firm and, or aspires to other, leadership positions. And I feel fortunate that I have these opportunities and have taken the challenges, and I include my brother's death in that. Is that what could have been, some people, unfortunately, when have experienced similar tragedies, have gone the opposite direction. And I took that challenge and turned it into an opportunity, and, in many different ways. And I think that's how I want to be remembered, is that I've been able to help people who haven't had those opportunities and maybe never will have those opportunities.
Well, I can tell you from my time at Eastern, super appreciative of the time that you commit to the university. It's obviously very important to me. I gave 10 years to be on the Alumni Association Board of Directors, and I know you've been on the foundation for a while, and you constantly look for new and unique ways to participate. You're obviously a distinguished alum. We recognize you as such, and got to tell your story, which most of you just heard which is basically what your story was, I think, the night that you received your award. And I'm just thankful that we have friendship and that your firm does great work for us, and that you are allowing us to come in here and have the opportunity to meet with you today.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Well, we will catch you all very soon. So tune into the next episode of Faithful.